deserts, and rivers. Before Africa became a patchwork of renamed states, this land already knew itself. It was not nameless. It was not waiting to be defined. Every valley, every river, every mountain had a name, whispered by ancestors, chanted by griots, and spoken in ceremonies under open skies. Modern African countries, as we know them today, are largely the result of colonial decisions made in boardrooms and palaces far from the continent. These names, Nigeria, Sudan, Cameroon, Malawi, were imposed without consent, often bearing no connection to the people or the land. They are relics of European empires, designed to serve maps, not memory. But beneath those names, older ones remain, some hidden, some still spoken, all alive in the soil, the spirit, and the stories. To explore Africa's original names is not just a history lesson, it is an act of remembrance. Because in African traditions, a name is not just a label, it is a technology. It is a vibration that carries purpose, ancestry, geography, and cosmology. To name a thing is to awaken it. To rename a land is to rewrite its destiny. When Europe renamed Africa, it didn't just reorganize territory. It disrupted spirit lines, silenced ancestral frequencies, and attempted to erase the identities of millions. But Africa remembers. In this documentary, we trace the ancient names of today's African nations. Names given by kings and queens, by elders and oracles, by the people who lived on this land long before the world changed. We will uncover the meanings hidden behind familiar borders and rediscover what these lands called themselves before anyone else did. This is not just a journey through cartography. It is a journey through memory, spirit, and resistance. Because to speak a name is to summon its truth. And the truth is this: Africa was never nameless. Africa was always speaking. We just have to learn how to listen again. In North Africa, the land spoke in the language of the sun, the river, and the ancestors. Long before colonial powers redrew these regions with foreign words, this part of the continent was home to some of the oldest civilizations known to humankind. The names carried by these lands were not random. They were sacred, symbolic, and deeply woven into the cosmologies of the people who lived there. These were not colonies waiting to be created. They were civilizations that had already risen, fallen, and left their spiritual imprint on the earth. Egypt was never originally called Egypt. The people who lived along the banks of the Nile knew their home as Kemet, the Black Land. Not black as in skin, but in reference to the fertile soil left behind by the river's annual floods. It was a name of life and rebirth, of balance between creation and chaos. Another name, Tameri, meant the beloved land, reflecting not just physical attachment, but sacred guardianship. The Nile was not simply a river, it was a celestial mirror, and Kemet was its earthly counterpart, a land of divine alignment, cosmic architecture, and sacred kingship. South of Kemet, in what is now modern-day Sudan, thrived the ancient civilizations of Kush, Nubia, and Tasseti. Kush was a mighty kingdom that produced the Black Pharaohs of Egypt's 25th dynasty. Its people were master builders, iron workers, and spiritual leaders. Tasseti, the land of the bow, was among the earliest known organized states in the Nile Valley, famed for its archers and its queens. Nubia was not a footnote to Egypt. It was its twin flame, its spiritual and military rival. The people of this region carved pyramids in stone and ruled with power and poise, long before foreign invasion would reduce their legacy to fragments. To the west, the land we now call Libya was once home to the Chehenu and Lebu peoples, desert dwellers described in ancient Egyptian texts. They were nomads, but not ruthless. They followed the rhythms of the land, the stars, and the seasons. These were the original people of the Sahara, spiritual travelers between realms. Their names evoke a time before the desert was a barrier, when it was a sea of knowledge and movement. Tunisia's ancient name lives on in the memory of Kot Hadasht, known to the Greeks and Romans as Carthage. Founded by Phoenician settlers, this new city became a maritime powerhouse. But Kot Hadasht wasn't merely a trade port, it was a beacon of rebirth, the spiritual offspring of Tyre. Rising along the Mediterranean to rival even Rome, its name was a declaration of beginning again, of cyclical resurgence, a flame rising from ashes. And then there is Mauritania, the land that stretched across modern-day Morocco and Algeria. Here lived the Amazigh or Berber peoples, the free people. The territories were never kingdoms in the European sense, but confederations of tribes connected by language, landscape, and law. The names of these lands spoke of freedom, autonomy, and sacred relationships with mountain ranges and desert winds. They were the guardians of the Atlas Mountains, the children of the sands, and the stewards of timeless trade routes. In North Africa, names were not drawn in ink. They were carved in stone, whispered in the wind, and sung in temples. Each name was a mirror of belief in resurrection, in freedom, in divine harmony. These were not just nations. They were cosmologies with borders made of myth, memory, and meaning. In West Africa, the names of the land beat like drums, deep, layered, rhythmic. They rose from the mouths of griots and the prayers of queens, from riverbanks and forest groves. Each name in this region carried more than identity, it carried inheritance. Names were not just descriptions of place, they were titles of power, echoes of the ancestors, and markers of rhythm of life, governance, trade, and song. The names of West Africa were forged in the fire of kingship and carried on the backs of caravans and calabashes alike. What we now call Ghana was once known as Ouagadougou, the heart of one of the oldest and most formidable empires in West African history. The word Ghana itself was not the name of the land, but the title of its ruler. The Ghana, meaning warrior king. Ouagadougou was a realm of gold, of kings seated on thrones guarded by dogs adorned in gold collars, of wealth that amazed even the far-traveling scholars of North Africa. This was a place where names were both political and spiritual. To call a man Ghana was to acknowledge his divine right to command, to guard the sacred trade, and to protect the lineage of the Soninke people. South of Ouagadougou rose Manden, the true name behind what the world would come to call the Mali Empire. Manden means land of the people, and it became the spiritual and political heart of the Mande-speaking world. This was more than a kingdom. It was a civilization of scholars, poets, and architects. From Manden came Mali, and from Mali came Mansa Musa, whose name still resonates with tales of pilgrimage and gold that disrupted economies across continents. But beneath the empire, Manden was first a land of kinship, a place where identity was drawn from communal belonging, not colonial lines. To the west, the country now known as Senegal was once part of a maritime continuum of meaning. The name Sunugal, which means our boat in Wolof, was likely misheard and rewritten by Portuguese traders as Senegal. But the true name reflected a people of rivers, of unity, of collective journey. Our boat was not just a vessel, it was a metaphor for nationhood, for shared survival, and for ancestral passage. In Nigeria, the diversity of pre-colonial names reveals a tapestry of kingdoms and cosmologies. Ile-Ife was the spiritual origin point of the Yoruba people, a place where, according to oral tradition, the gods first stepped onto earth. If means expansion, and the city was a religious capital where kings were not just monarchs but sacred vessels. The Benin Kingdom with its master bronze casting and urban planning, was a civilization so advanced that Portuguese sailors were stunned by its order and beauty. In the southeast, Igboland was a federation of village republics bound by kinship and spirit. Later, in a moment of resistance and reclamation, the name Biafra emerged, a reference to deep waters and the bite of Biafra, tied to indigenous ideas of origin, unity, and struggle. To the west of Nigeria lies the modern Republic of Benin, once home to the mighty kingdom of Dahomey. The name Dahomey comes from the Fon language, often translated as on the Bailey of Dan, a reference to a foundational legend involving a warrior king and a sacred serpent. This was more than mere geography. It was cosmology. The name invoked divine protection, wisdom, and the eternal cycle of life, all embodied in the serpent, a symbol of continuity and transformation. Further north lies Burkina Faso, a country once labeled Upper Volta by colonial powers, named after the rivers it intersected. But in 1984, it reclaimed a name in its own languages, Burkina Faso, a combination of Moore and Dioula, meaning land of upright people. This was not just a renaming, it was a spiritual correction, a return to a name that reflected dignity, moral clarity, and sovereignty. In the coastal lands of Sierra Leone, Guinea, and Liberia, ancient identities were defined by peoples like Detemni, Susu, Mende, and Kru. These were not artificial constructs, but ethno-linguistic civilizations with the deep knowledge of the sea, music, and resistance. Their names may not have been etched into global maps, but they lived in oral epics, dance rituals, and ancestral forests, places where history was danced and drummed, not written. West Africa's names were born of royalty, rivers, and rhythm. They encoded social contracts, sacred geography, and the pulse of generations. And though many were replaced by foreign tongues, the original names still whisper beneath the soil, waiting to be heard, sung, and remembered again. Central Africa, often overlooked in the broader narrative of ancient African civilizations, was in truth the continent's spiritual core. What we now call the Democratic Republic of Congo was once part of a vast and unified cosmological vision known as Congo Dia Ntotila. The concept of Dikenga, a spiritual cosmogram, organized time, seasons, life, and death into a sacred cycle, with the king at its center. The land itself was not just territory, but a living altar. Congo's Dia Ntotila extended well beyond current borders, uniting peoples through ritual, language, and sacred memory. Across the river, in the land now known as the Republic of Congo, the same kingdom thrived, commonly referred to by historians as the Congo Kingdom. The Bakongo people, the custodians of this civilization, had an intricate system of spiritual governance. This was not a dictatorship of power, it was a stewardship of cosmology. Southward, in present-day Angola, two of the most resilient and spiritually empowered kingdoms emerged, Ndongo and Matamba. These were not only centers of resistance against Portuguese invasion, but realms ruled by some of the most iconic African monarchs, including Queen Nzinga. The name Ndongo refers to the forging of metal, a fitting symbol for a kingdom shaped in fire, resistance, and transformation. Matamba too was a spiritual stronghold where womanhood, warfare, and ritual governance intertwined. These were not passive societies, they were flames of memory resisting foreign erasure with sacred strength. To the west in Cameroon, the name Mboa endures in local usage, meaning homeland in both Douala and Beti languages. It was not the name of a kingdom, but a spiritual claim to origin, to belonging, and to sacred space. For the peoples of the region, the concept of Mboa was more than national identity. It was the center of the world, a return point, a cradle of life. In songs, proverbs, and ancestral rites, Mboa continues to signify the unbreakable bond between people and place. Further inland, across Chad and the Central African Republic, rose the ancient kingdoms of Kanem-Bornu and the Mandara mountain states. These were Islamic African empires with dynasties that stretched over 1,000 years, linking desert traders with forest dwellers and kings with sages. Kanem-Bornu was more than a trade hub. It was a center of Islamic scholarship and political sophistication, where rulers were guardians of both Quranic knowledge and ancestral tradition. The Mandara Mountains, meanwhile, sheltered smaller polities rooted in oral law, mountain worship, and initiation rituals passed through generations. This central region of Africa was never peripheral. It was the sacred spine of the continent, a place where land, law, and lineage met. Its names speak of unity, of divine kinship, and of fire-forged resilience. In every mountain, river, and ritual, Central Africa remembered what the world would one day forget: that leadership without spirit is hollow, and land without a name is silence. Here, names were shields, and the people who bore them walked in the footsteps of gods. East Africa rises with the sun. It is the place where light first touches the continent each morning, a fitting truth for a region whose ancient names are filled with radiance, ascension, and sacred movement. The lands of the Horn and the eastern coastline have always been bathed in spiritual symbolism, their names echoing the rhythm of mountains, oceans, incense, and song. In this corner of Africa, names were shaped by both the heavens and the sea, embodying the dual forces of divine elevation and expansive trade. These were not just nations. They were thresholds between the physical and the eternal. At the spiritual and political heart of the region stands Ethiopia, whose ancient names, Abyssinia, Habesha, and Kush, tell a story of divine resilience. Habesha refers to the ethnic and cultural identity that stretches back thousands of years, while Abyssinia was the external name used by foreign powers for centuries. But in the Bible and other ancient texts, Ethiopia is referred to as Kush, a land of black kings, wisdom, and divine favor. To the north, Eritrea was known as Medri Bahari, meaning land of the sea in Tigrinya. This name reflected not only its geography but its identity, a people of the highlands and the coast, of terraced mountains and deep harbors. Medri Bahari was a kingdom in its own right before colonial intervention, and its name resonated with the rhythm of waves and the power of maritime sovereignty. East of there, Somalia holds perhaps one of the most legendary names in African antiquity, the land of Punt. Known in Egyptian texts as a land of incense, gold, exotic animals, and spiritual abundance, Punt was a revered trading partner of the pharaohs. Later, Arab geographers referred to the region as Bilad al-Barbar, the land of the Berbers, in reference to its coastal people and their mastery of the sea. Somalia's coastlines were dotted with bustling ports long before European ships arrived. Its people were traders, mystics, and sailors, carrying the scent of myrrh and the wisdom of monsoon winds. Moving south, we reach Kenya, known in Kikuyu tradition as Kirinyaga, Mountain of Brightness, named for Mount Kenya, a sacred peak believed to be the dwelling place of God. The mountain was a place of prayer and cosmic connection, its snow-capped summit shimmering with divine presence. Kirinyaga wasn't just a name, it was a cosmological compass. It oriented the people not just geographically but spiritually, pointing upward toward the source. Further down the coast lies Tanzania, a modern union of Tanganyika and Zanzibar. The name Tanganyika is believed to mean sail in the wilderness, or great lake spreading like a plain, while Zanzibar derives from Persian and Swahili roots, meaning coast of the blacks, or land of spices. Together, these names tell the story of a region steeped in maritime trade, Islamic scholarship, and coastal cosmopolitanism. Dhow sails cut through the Indian Ocean like pages of scripture, carrying Swahili, Arabic, Persian, and African ideas across oceans. Inland lies Uganda, home to pre-colonial kingdoms like Buganda, Bunyoro, and Toro. These were not tribal villages, but well-organized monarchies ruled by Kabakas and Omukamas, complete with royal courts, music traditions, and diplomatic systems. Buganda especially was known for its powerful navy on Lake Victoria and for its deep reverence for drum culture, where drums did not just signal, they spoke. Every kingdom had its own beat, and every beat carried memory. East Africa's names shimmer with meaning. They speak of mountains that touch the heavens, of coastlines kissed by moonlight, of kingdoms ruled by rhythm, and of spirits carried on trade winds. This Northern Africa, the land is marked by stone, not just as geology, but as testimony. These are lands where cities were built not only to shelter people, but to honor ancestors, the earth, and the divine. The names of Southern Africa carry weight. They speak of legacy, of cattle and kingship, of sacred architecture and spiritual sovereignty. Before the colonizers imposed borders and foreign flags, this region knew itself through names carved in stone, whispered by mountains, and guarded by the spirits of the land. At the heart of this ancient memory stands Zimbabwe, a country whose very name was reclaimed from its ancestral roots, Dzimba Dzamabwe, meaning houses of stone in the Shona language, refers to the iconic city of Great Zimbabwe, a stone-built metropolis that flourished between the 11th and 15th centuries. With its towering walls, intricate stone masonry, and absence of mortar, Great Zimbabwe confounded early European explorers who refused to believe it could have been built by Africans. But the name told the truth long before the archaeology did. Zimbabwe wasn't just a city, it was a center of trade, power, and cosmological alignment. The stone structures were aligned with stars, and each wall bore the memory of generations. To say, Dzimba Dzamabwe was to call upon the strength of civilization anchored in stone and spirit. To the south, what we now call South Africa was once known in Arab and early Greek sources as AZANIA, a name meaning land of the black people. For centuries, AZANIA appeared on ancient maps as a long stretch of coast along the Indian Ocean, recognized by maritime traders from Arabia, Persia, and beyond. The name was not just geographical, it was a recognition of identity. AZANIA stood as a term of pride and presence, marking the southernmost peoples of Africa as sovereign and visible, long before Europeans would rename the land for their own dominion. In the territory now called Botswana, the pre-colonial name was Bechuanaland, derived from the Batswana people, meaning land of the Tswana. The Tswana were a proud pastoralist society, and cattle were central to their cosmology. Cattle were not merely economic assets. They were tied to rituals of blessing, social rank, and divine favor. The land was shaped by kinship, cattle, and the unspoken codes of respect passed down through generations. In the Tswana worldview, land was not owned, it was cared for, shared, and lived with in sacred relationship. To the west lies Namibia, a country whose true identity is rooted in the ancient homelands of the Nama and Herero peoples. These were communities of resilience, known for their herding cultures, spiritual traditions, and connection to desert and river. The Nama language is one of the oldest in the world, with complex click sounds and a deep lexicon of environmental knowledge. The Herero too lived through colonial violence with dignity, carrying their names, dress, and stories into the present. Before the land was renamed Namibia, it echoed with indigenous names that honored cattle, ancestors, and elemental forces. On the southeastern coast, Mozambique holds the memory of the mighty Mwene Mutapa Empire and the ancient trade city of Sofala. Mwene Mutapa, often called the Lord of the Mountain, was a title of kingship rooted in divine right. This empire stretched across what is now Zimbabwe and Mozambique, controlling gold mines and commanding trade routes that linked inland Africa to the Swahili coast. The name Sofala was whispered among sailors as a port of great wealth, a place where African gold met Arabian sail. These were lands not of scarcity, but of abundance, governed by spiritual kings whose power came from mountain thrones. Further inland, the nations of Zambia and Malawi emerged from kingdoms like Barotseland and the Maravi Confederacy. Barotseland, centered around the Lozi people, was built along the mighty Zambezi River, a kingdom of floodplains, cattle wealth, and a monarchy that still survives symbolically to this day. The Maravi were the ancestors of today's Chiwa and Nyanja people bred in culture. The Maravi Confederacy was a loose alliance of powerful clans that extended across lakes and mountains, sustained by trade, kinship, and the guardianship of sacred geography. Southern Africa's ancient names tell a story of groundedness, of civilizations born from rock, crowned with cattle, and guided by the divine. These were not scattered tribes waiting to be named. They were sovereign societies built on stone cities, ancestral codes, and sacred soil. When we say their names, we do not just remember, we stand on the foundations they laid. In the shimmering waters of Africa's great coasts, the island nations held their own stories, quiet yet profound, small in land but vast in memory. The island was known to its people as Madagascar, land of the Malagasy. The name alone is a testament to self-definition, an echo of indigenous identity against the waves of foreign interest. The Malagasy people, whose ancestry stretches back to Austronesian and African roots, carried their names across the Indian Ocean with canoes and early sailing vessels, landing on this vast island and weaving a new cultural fabric in dialogue with earth, forest, and sea. Madagascar isn't just a geographic label. It is a reminder that the island's story belongs first to its people, and in their language lies its truest memory. It stayed alive in names spoken at dusk, in songs repeated on docks, in languages that mixed Swahili expressions with Austronesian roots. And their names, Madagascar, Kama, Komori, still sing today. They are just to remember that Africa's periphery was not remote, it was relational.
Amatengazaje kuseza bakomo kama ibaje.